Hi, I'm Ryan. And where's the power in Congress?
You know where to find me. Any place, anytime, cowboy. Sir, this is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big guy.
Oh, stop it.
Well, with the Speaker of the House, you may say. But what if the Speaker's party is out of power in the House, or the Senate, or even the White House? Well, with the party leadership, you retort. But what about loud minority party activists like Marjorie Taylor Greene or even members of the Squad and Bernie Sanders? Can't they swing the Overton window? Well, with the voters, you say. After all, members of Congress are responsible to their constituents and need to be re-elected every 2 to 6 years, right? But what about large donors? What about party pressure? What about the nuances of legislation that average people just don't care about? Well, you say, just shut up and answer your own question. I think I'll do that. Basically, it's complicated. And in this video, we'll answer that question through 4 quick stops. First, we'll go back to the founding and see how Article 1's blueprint tried to channel power through a 2-chamber Congress. Second, we'll jump to the present and discuss how party leaders tweak, rewrite, and sometimes ignore the procedural playbook to keep that power in their hands. Third, we'll leave Capitol Hill for the campaign trail to track how re-election fears, donors, and public opinion pull members toward and away from their districts. Finally, we'll step back, add it all up, and ask what this constant tug-of-war means for real-world power and for the voters who think they hold it. If you want to understand where Congress gets its power, you've got to start at the source, Article 1 of the Constitution. This is where the framers laid down the blueprint for the legislative branch, giving all legislative powers herein granted to a 2-part Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. That 2-chamber design wasn't just for show. James Madison, along with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, writing as Publius in the Federalist Papers, argued that a single legislature was too vulnerable to passion and political whiplash. The House, they said, should be close to the people, elected every 2 years, driven by public opinion, and holding the powerful purse strings through its control over taxes and spending. The Senate, on the other hand, was built for stability and wisdom. Senators were originally chosen by state legislatures, served longer terms, and represented state interests rather than the shifting woes of public opinion. Together, the House and Senate would check each other's excesses, a built-in guardrail against tyranny. You should see my previous video on the separation of power for more information. This is all a rather idealistic view of the framers' intent, but one we need to adopt to understand how structurally Congress can be said it's supposed to work. But structure is just part of the story. Congress's powers are spelled out in detail in Article 1, Section 8, with what's called their enumerated powers. These include things like collecting taxes, regulating commerce, declaring war, coining money, and raising armies, core stuff for any functioning national government. Publius insisted that these powers were necessary to avoid the chaos that came with the Articles of Confederation. In those articles, a national legislative assembly couldn't do much beyond asking the states to pretty please do this or pretty please stop. And to make sure Congress could actually use its powers effectively, the framers added the necessary and proper clause, basically allowing Congress to make any laws needed to carry out its listed power. Contrary to critics at the time, this wasn't a blank check. Madison argued it simply clarified a truth already baked into the logic of building a real government. If you give someone a job, you have to let them use the tools of that trade. Still, the framers weren't in the business of creating a legislative monster. As we've discussed on this channel before, they were obsessed with balance, and they knew that Congress, being the branch closest to the people, would be especially prone to overreach. That's why Article 1, Section 9 lays out clear limits. No ex post facto laws, punishing actions retroactively. No bills of attainder, laws declaring someone guilty without a trial. No suspending habeas corpus, the right to challenge unlawful detention, unless the country is under threat. Abraham Lincoln did this in the Civil War. And beyond those written rules, the whole system is balanced with checks and balances. Altogether, it's a system built to function, but never dominate. That's all well and good, but that doesn't really seem like how Congress actually works. built to function is really laughable when you think about it. So that's how Congress was designed in theory, but how does it work in practice?
I recall we say aye, and then as long as nobody says nay, the bill is passed into law.
I know somebody hits a gavel.
I concur. I also remember a gavel being involved at some point.
Well, in that case, I move that we look up stores where we can buy a gavel.
Let the record reflect that we have decided to figure out where we can get a gavel from.
First things first, the rules of the game on Capitol Hill are flexible and impermanent. In practice, they're more like house rules for poker, made up on the spot by those playing the game. Legislators reinterpret procedures, invent new ones, and sometimes ignore them outright whenever it helps them win the moment. Think of it this way. Every 2 years, we ostensibly have an entirely new House of Representatives. They need to create new laws to govern that Congress, and a full third of the Senate filters in and out every 2 years. Let's explain this a little bit further by starting with the majority party. Under procedural cartel theory, leaders corner the market on every position that matters. That's the Rules Committee, the Speaker's chair, and conference schedule. Then they use that monopoly to keep bills they dislike off the floor and speed along the ones they approve of. The cartel's control means that rank-and-file members rarely see a vote that can split the party in public. When the conference is internally united, and the other side dissents, members happily hand even more authority to their leadership. That's conditional party government. The tighter the intra-party consensus, and the wider the inter-party gulf, the more power flows to the Speaker's suite. Newt Gingrich's mid-1990s House of Representatives is a perfect example of this. Committee chairs were yanked, appropriations were packaged, and dissenters were promptly sidelined under his leadership.
Lord Acton was correct in saying that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It is clear from all the different ethics problems in the House that it is time for a house cleaning of the U.S. House of Representatives, and the only way to do that is with the Republican majority.
Information is valuable ammunition in Congress, and leaders decide who gets what info and when. By drafting bills in back rooms, timing releases, and writing closed rules that bar amendments, they keep everyone else legislating in the dark. In today's knife-edge majorities, that secrecy dovetails with non-stop electoral anxiety. Members would rather fire off press releases than forge bipartisan deals simply because there's less value to them in doing the latter, particularly if we understand them to be predominantly motivated by the prospect of re-election. Yet, even the most dominant majority can't bulldoze every obstacle. Some constraints are baked into the structure of the institution of Congress. The theory of pivotal politics, primarily articulated by Keith Craybill in his 1998 work Pivotal Politics, A Theory of U.S. Lawmaking, explains U.S. lawmaking by attributing policy stalemates and outcomes to structural requirements for supermajorities, such as the Senate filibuster and the presidential veto overrides. It identifies specific pivotal players where the success or failure of a piece of legislation pivots on their say-so, whose preferences are crucial in determining legislative success. For example, the veto pivot caused by the threat of a presidential veto, and the filibuster pivot caused by the threat of a filibuster in the Senate. Let's explain that in a bit more detail. Supermajority requirements, that being cloture in the Senate, 2/3 to override a veto, create pivotal legislators whose single vote can freeze everything. Consider John McCain and the failed overturning of Obamacare in 2017, or the continuous issues Democrats had with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema under the Biden administration. Add in bicameralism's built-in differences between the House and the Senate, and you get plenty of policy stuck in the gridlock interval between the filibuster pivot and the veto pivot. The theory of pivotal politics treats those hurdles as immovable, and often that's a correct way of viewing congressional operations. Studies of the pre-cloture Senate showed slim majorities passing bills only when they could peel off enough obstructionists to break the pivot logic. However, party-centric scholars counter that leaders still shape which issues reach a pivot in the first place. Put differently, constitutional architecture supplies the walls, but members keep remodeling the interior. Rules are both cage and toolkit, external enough to block easy shortcuts, internal enough to let creative majorities find new ones. That tension is why Congress can look rigid on a Tuesday and seem to reinvent itself by that Thursday.
I want to read you the opening lines of a couple fundraising texts I got. Friend, I don't mean to sound dramatic, but our democracy is about to burn to the fucking ground. My ass is literally on fire, RN. This is Chuck Schumer, by the way.
We've seen how rules can block or fast-track a bill, but none of that matters if you're not around to vote. So, are members of Congress receptive to their constituents? Is the power in the hands of the people as we'd like to think it is? After all, members of Congress wake up every morning hearing one thing in their heads: re-election, re-election, re-election. David Mayhew called them single-minded seekers of re-election, and that instinct still drives a lot of daily behavior. Advertising their successes, credit claiming for a federal grant, or taking a clear position on a hot issue, all of this is calibrated to keep voters happy and rivals out of next November's headlines. However, it's important to note that re-election isn't a single universal path. There are, of course, obvious contextual deviations by district. Richard Fenno, in his seminal work Homestyle, showed that representatives think of their district in concentric circles, from the whole constituency down to the handful who will knock doors for them. Tailoring that homestyle means different moves for different audiences. For example, let's do a ribbon-cutting photo for the local paper, then do a fiery committee speech clipped for the national headlines, or quiet casework that turns one frustrated veteran into a lifelong supporter of that candidate. If we zoom out, public opinion looks more like a thermostat than a megaphone echoing the wishes of the people directly. When government turns the policy heat up, voters often dial it back down, and vice versa. James Stimson and others show lawmakers really do adjust, nudging their roll call votes and bill priorities to stay within the comfort zone of their constituents. Campaigns matter too. Challengers who hammer a neglected issue can pull the incumbent onto that turf once in office, what Tracy Sulkin labels issue uptake. Representation also happens through who sits in the chambers of Congress. Shared identities, whether race, gender, or socioeconomic background, can build trust and move policy for marginalized groups. Women and minority legislators are measurably more likely to intervene with agencies on behalf of constituents who look like them. That's a lot of citations. That's a lot of citations. The literature even finds that many female members sponsor more bills and steer more dollars home, partly because they sense a gendered vulnerability at the polls. Essentially, they have to work harder and prove themselves because of this inherent voter bias against women. Still, voters don't hold all the cards. Politicians often practice crafted talk, using pollsters and spin to shape opinion rather than following the opinion of the public. Elections can look like mandates but reflect shallow identities and momentary grievances more than coherent policy demands from average voters like you and me. Many voters even update their own positions after choosing a candidate, basically following the leader instead of pushing policy drift based on their own inherent previously held values. National forces pull the ear of members of Congress away from their specific constituencies, too. House candidates now mirror their party's brand more than the unique ideology of their district that they represent. And on social media, they chase the issue priorities of partisan supporters and pre-existing loyalists, not the median voter back home. Further, inside the Capitol, staffers often guess their districts are more conservative than they actually are, thanks to their own leanings and constant contact with well-funded interest groups. Along those lines, money and politics complicates the picture even more. Wealthy donors can gain a louder voice, but their sway isn't automatic. Senators still lean towards co-partisan positions when preferences collide with their moneyed supporters, so at least we have that to hang our hats on. Meanwhile, low political knowledge and partisan filters limit how voters evaluate the performance of their specific members of Congress. Media choice widens those gaps, and emotional appeals, especially fear, can sway the public one way or another. Top it all off with structural shields, gerrymandered districts, incumbency perks, and the sheer cost of running for office, and the electoral link between the voter and their members of Congress's policy output looks sturdy but far from perfect. In short, voters set the outer boundaries of acceptable behavior, but within that fence, members navigate a maze of identity, information, money, and institutional design. So, when we ask, does Congress really listen? The honest answer is yes, but the megaphone, to further torture the earlier metaphor, is muffled and hard to make out. The ballot box matters, yet the signal voters send filters through parties, donors, media, and psychology before it reaches the House or the Senate floor. And that, inconveniently, is where the power of the people meets the realities of modern American politics.
You dreamt of Dracula, you said? While we're on this sort of stuff, you heard of the Pied Piper? Well, in my dream, Pied Piper had toilet paper, one sheet of the cheap kind.
Yes.
And he took that and he ripped out a creme brulee and a little tiny pepper
Yes.
before he ate a tree. You didn't have that dream?
Yes, I did.
Okay, nope. Okay, you did not. Don't tell me you did.
So, to answer the question from the title of the video, power sits mainly with the people who write, bend, and sometimes break the rules. That's party leaders and the coalitions they muster. The Constitution's exogenous blueprint still matters, but the real action is endogenous. Whichever faction controls the agenda, committee slots, and procedural shortcuts effectively decides what makes it to the floor and what never sees daylight. Now, voters retain a little leverage. To some extent, they choose the players, and the fear of losing a seat keeps members listening. Yet once those members arrive in Washington, their imperatives of party, information control, and rulemaking autonomy often pull them away from campaign promises and toward the priorities of leadership. In short, Congress runs on a dynamic balance. Public elections open the door to the voices of citizens, but rulemakers are the ones who hold the keys. Understanding who those rule makers are and how they continually reshape the game is key to understanding where power really lives on Capitol Hill. There's a list of references cited in this video in the description below. In the next one, we're going to explain an increasingly relevant theory of executive authority. Until next time.